hands. Has anybody here been to Iowa, have a relation in Iowa, any of that stuff? Okay. Guess I can't make stuff up. But is my accent coming through? Okay. All right, because there's a lot of Iowa jokes we could say. Whoa.
A neutral salt.
Here's the thing. Like, I'm Iowa State. Yeah, our football program's rebuilding again. Yeah, I know. Maybe the next year. So we're eternal optimists. So love it. So I'm going to start out this presentation with a disclaimer. This is the fine print, okay? So that you guys understand what kind of session we're sitting into, and that I'm going to read through this so that I can say I said in the beginning of the presentation. The following presentation is a collection of slides that detail my experience
of coming up with a
growers in Northwest Iowa.
For example.
So are these the sole
Okay, so byproduct gypsum
success, moreover an explanation of my experience. I don't have a master's degree or a PhD from an accredited academic institution. I am working on continuing my School of Hard Knocks and can drive a tractor in a straight line with auto steer most days like nobody's business. All right? So there's a disclaimer. This is just the School of Hard Knocks I learned through doing about 11 years of OnFarm Trials. That's where I'm located, up here in Northwest Iowa. We do have indoor plumbing. We do have the internet. You get across over to South Dakota, things might change. But nobody's in South Dakota either, are they? Okay, I just put my foot in my mouth. But no, so we concentrated basically on the northwest corner of the OnFarm Trials.
A lot of it,
a research center there.
A lot of it right.
I'll explain some of that. So my background, I grew up in a farm in Northwest Iowa. Just a corn. A lot of what we have in the state of Iowa. We're not diversified much as here in Maryland are. We started with Iowa State in 2005. They didn't have an on-farm project. They just got a meeting together and said, you know what, we should start doing on-farm trials. And everything on paper always looks like a great idea until it comes to practice. How are you going to do that? Well, I don't know. It wasn't on the sheet of paper. Figure it out. So some of my work experience, I don't know if you guys ever see these funny-looking blue combines.
And the amount of that
little two-row combine, you guys want to take a guess what that costs? Higher. It's about $350,000, $400,000. And that's ridiculous, isn't it? So they're not used for production, harvest. They're used for small plot research, complete clean out. So I spent some time with Almaco, and before I was at Almaco, I'd actually been in Maryland for 2 different stints for about a total of a month. And where Maryland gets really narrow up there by West Virginia and Pennsylvania. Holy cow. You know, I thought we had rocks in Iowa. No. I think you guys got dust that's blown in between mountains.
You also have Bird Farm in our area.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I couldn't believe it. We were field verifying John Deere's XP Roshank. They were moving it to a cast alloy, and we were going across these rocks at 6 miles an hour. That's a terrible idea, right? I mean, that was one of those things on a protocol that you guys should probably understand the circumstances, how farmers plan out here before you start coming out there. Well, it sounds really cool to break stuff until every half hour.
Correct.
You're sitting there wrenching on stuff and the repair bill goes up like that. So that was my experience of being in this area. And then, as you can tell, I'm very well versed in the eating department. I don't know if you ever have Wells Blue Bunny ice cream out here. You ever see that? Yeah. I'm an official taste tester. That's actually a job. One time they sent me home with homework. I had 3 gallons of ice cream. I had to fill out the sheet of paper, and at the end of the week they sent me for $50. So I'm not a complainer. So anyhow, enough about me.
So
again, going back to why did Iowa State start OnFarm Trials? We had 2 research stations in Northwest Iowa. They were about 60 miles apart. The one was 4.5 hours from Ames, where the home of Iowa State is. And it was very difficult to get any researchers to do any kind of research up in that neck of the woods. We also had a full-time employee that had been employed for about 40 years retire. Iowa State was also going through budget cuts. And so they were not going to fill that position with a full-time employee. And so one of the things that they thought is if we could get a little creative and think about
and that's because
that we could use the funds from the light farm, have it bulk farmed, and then try this on-farm thing.
No, real
Extension appointment, part-time research farm appointment, maybe we could come up with a full-time employee. Crazy ideas like that really worked out. Now, the two research sites are actually owned by a governing board. We call it the Northwest Iowa Experimental Association.
100,
A group of farmers back in the
220.
before the internet was public that were able to buy farm. They put in $100 and then they got all this information, this research information back so that they could help fix their farm. Was intended to do. Well, obviously, as the internet's come along, research information's been a lot more accessible, and the attendance, they were dwindling off. How do we get our PR boost back?
Second,
we make things happen for that experimental association, make them a lifeblood again. And then, you know, small plot research. How often does a 50-foot plot on a farm 60 miles away from where I'm at really correlate to what's going to work on my farm? Never. It's not going to work. If I had a nickel for every time I've heard that,
gypsum. Okay, so why does
back double on that? There's a lot of times that I don't own a lot of money. I sincerely mean that too. And then one of the
impact
that I was saying,
so
well, we don't want to give you a lot of money to start that program, but we want you to do all this, this, and this, and this. So I'm probably a little more crude than what I should be. So like Phil, if I'm going to put it on you, like when I go over the line to be going like that.
Good.
All right. So I started officially
you
in
can
2005, the early summer 2005.
the formation
A few
of secondary minerals in the system
more getting your
you consider.
starting
That's exactly.
farmers, things like that. So it was a third of my job was to find a group of farmers, talk them into doing some on-farm trials, lead them through that, and collect some data, and then throughout the year work at this research station. First year we had 11 growers and about 16 projects, and then up until about 2016 we had 21 different locations of farmers we were working with, and about plus projects. And that was about all I could take. Through my career I'd evolved to starting to manage the research station too, so there was enough that I couldn't quite handle it. So I talked about kind of Northwest Iowa. You can't probably tell the yellow lines here, but those were the three counties that were
in other states
affected by the satellite research farm that we had closed. Well, I shouldn't say closed, but transitioned. That's the appropriate term. So we were trying to find similar soils, farmers that we would be willing to participate in doing on-farm trials in that area to help us still
ground, at least as the first
quality information. And then as the project grew, that's where the main research farm was. There's another one here about 60 miles, and then there was one about 60 miles that we expanded as time went on. So the basic premise of my whole presentation, and you guys probably already know it,
a whole bunch of coal combustion by
on-farm trials, the same lesson we learned in kindergarten, is to treat everyone the way you want to be treated. You show up on a farmer's place and say, hey, here, do this on-farm trial for me. I need the answers in the fall. People aren't too receptive to that. So what did we do to start an on-farm project or on-farm trial program?
try to serve.
What our process was,
They tend to have a Pennsylvania soil.
randomize
They also
and replicate projects. We would probably typically look at 2, maybe 3,
from Pennsylvania.
occasionally 4 variables, stuff that were field length strips. We were not going into complicating things. We wanted to make sure we were keeping it simple. We wanted to eliminate variables within our control. And some of those things seem pretty simple, but like I'd have some guys that say, let's do a seed treatment.
Is per hour.
I said, that's great. We need to get 2 varieties of beans, one with a seed treatment, one with I've already ordered them.
Studies we're going to look at, they're looking at
T85,
storm.
T69. And I'm like,
And we'll understand why as we look at the data. So this is a picture of the
it's not. Wait a minute.
we're doing phosphorus.
That's not a good design. That's not a good question to ask, because how do we know where that seed treatment response, if there is one, where did it come from? And you got to be very tactful, obviously, when you poke holes in their story, but it's the process. Even if it sounds done, you got to
Agreed on some stuff about info later and
the contact with the operator in Iowa State. Jason, you're extension agent, is that correct?
I work for the Department of Plant Science.
Department of Plant Science.
products
So like at Iowa State, we have Tory with extension
running off. They can contrast.
stuff, and so we've always called extension our in-laws. you know, we're all the same family, but they're on that side. They have their budget. They have their operations.
But this is still
And we had our operations and education had their side.
boxes.
And so, like, before, you know, we were aware of them, but we really didn't interconnect. And so now we became kind of contact for both a cooperator and
Exactly, but
and then managing these relationships. You were the person that this all fell upon. You know, if a farmer had a question, if you needed to get an answer from campus, we were the guys that made sure that we did that, maintaining that relationship. If they wanted to know what Russ Glade was doing, I was the guy they called on. When I say we're the caller, we were the guys that were doing the work. You know, the boots on the ground, doing the stand counts, digging the roots, doing the disease analysis. Needed to be collected, supplement that on-farm data.
these are the,
Relying upon specialists
on three,
from campus to do that, and we certainly didn't have the money to hire interns to go out there and do that stuff. And then, you know, make the sale. Why is there a benefit of doing on-farm trials? It's going to slow me down. Do I really need that information? Is it good for me?
can't mix.
These are the things that you need to make through, or make sure when you're developing a cooperator that they fully understand what they're getting themselves into until you
Certification as well.
they just go right through the plot because it took too long. And create that service. Make sure that you're the person that they understand that you really want that trial. Now, when I say
See what
randomization,
they did. 'Cause
it's pretty simple. You know, I always try to get guys to do 4 replications, you know, depending on what your treatment list is. If you have 2 or 3, but field length strips. And that changes according to what kind of pattern in the field you have. But, you know, as simple as that. We wanted, ideally, you know, Iowa field is about 23
in the graph.
long. We'd go down to field lengths about 400 feet long. Now, there were guys who would use yield monitors. We'd want field lengths at least 1,000 feet that are well calibrated. And we would always double check them for that service, that if you need your yield monitor calibrated, we've got a way we can be along with that process. So here's kind of the process I was hoping to go through and just explain, you know, what do we look for in a recruit? What's the right personality that helped us become successful? And the process of going through the season. And so probably the one thing that's probably the most important on this slide was the follow-up and the follow-up and the follow-up. Because if you don't do the following up
Different, even though they're numerical.
earlier, if you just drop off the protocol and get any of the yield data, what kind of luck are you going to have? If it didn't matter to you, why is it going to matter?
That's all non-significant.
And I
Happened by chance alone. All right.
can testify to that time and time again. They know that. And I've tried to make it a process that every time that I'm going to show up at their site, I call them and I let them know that I'm going to be there.
Again, the 10-ton per person rate did reduce the side significantly.
Out of 10, they're going to say, let me know what you found. But they know
Significantly different.
into that project. So again, this is from a tractor driver's perspective, but the ideal cooperator
Now, I want
to work with are farmers that want to learn.
a field skill.
Guys that are big operators that could have a lot of potential pull with other guys in the area, and it doesn't end well.
And
It doesn't end well because they didn't want to slow down.
phosphorus.
They didn't want to make sure they had the time and that were set correctly, so we were getting good data from that. So the thing that I found is that if I've got people that are, am I sure that I
was
need
doing experiments on had been in the
if you ask me that question, then I know they're invested in what the answer is.
Annie and then
I'm
he had a poultry.
on an idea. Patience. You know, during spring and fall, year was no different. Do I really have the time to do this on-farm trial? And even with the weather, I'm not sure if you guys had this
To the back.
weather pattern as us out in Iowa, but this was the worst spring I've had in all my years of farming. That doesn't say a lot, but it was terrible. You know, up until mid-April, it was pretty ideal, and then all of a sudden, mid-April to mid-May, it was awful. Cold, wet, rainy, and then all of a sudden it turned, and we had about 4 days, and then it was rain again, off and again, and then we were pretty much done by about the 10th of June. It was miserable, and I would have never guessed the yields that we had, but it was a testament.
Okay.
What I'm getting to is the farmers that we worked with still struggled through and put those plots in, even though the small window that we had. Owns the essential equipment, and I know this probably sounds really crazy, But like, I don't know if you guys have it here, but we have farmers that custom plant, custom harvest. So some guys don't own their own planter or own their own combine. I've never had much luck with having
the water, and it actually is supposed to go, right?
that. The custom operators, they get acres done. Now, make a custom
Lines up
planter work out so that if the farmer that I'm working with has his own combine, we can do a foliar trial. We can make stuff like that work. But if we're going to change populations or change seed or split the plant,
just
stuff like that almost have to be there.
reactive
Otherwise, it's a headache. I'm trying to get a quick return for what we're doing while maintaining a very positive relationship.
micron.
Willing to better their agricultural.
So this would include both the size
Curious about that because I was very fortunate in Northwest Iowa. We had a great group of farmers
of that today.
share ideas and help
No-till, high, we don't know.
from what they had learned on their own farm or make ideas, move to the next level. But there were some guys, as you got further west and south, why do I want to share the information I learned on my
So we tried to put it all on,
What they're going to do is turn around and rent my ground away from me.
and the units are up here.
Never given that much thought to it, and it's probably a reasonable concern. What we ended up doing was we took all of our
Had some-
names off of the projects and then just put them under a code name so there weren't any hard feelings. And if farmers wanted to share that information with their neighbors, that was their choice. That wasn't something that we could come back and say, hey, Iowa State helped me lose my ground.
itself.
I appreciate that. So, yeah.
Field, all right? Now,
But-
look at what happens when we add manure.
Stands bias. That's a very serious thing. You know what? The corn looks better, so it's going to yield better. There must be something wrong with your scale. Or, you know what? I paid $17 an acre for that insecticide. It has to pay. There must be something wrong with my combine. Sometimes it's,
Same, all right?
and if it didn't work, why didn't it work? And that's some of the observational data we can talk about too. But understanding just because you paid for it doesn't mean you're going to get that return on it. And that's a subjective mind that we want to get into those farmers is that at times things don't work. And sometimes they do. And we love it. That's what we want to do. So
You put it over here.
most farmers aren't researchers. One of the best stories I have, I got to
When gypsum was used, and
also
until
a farmer, he's like,
it was applied to. Now, realize that it dropped it a lot, right? But it's still more.
yeah, that's not going to work. So I learned that you got to explain things like that. They just got a different frame of mind, and that's fine. And my favorite story to tell is we had a farmer that I was sharing some data of doing aerial versus no fungicide on tasseled corn.
Jump around and see who found what where doing.
He comes up to the meeting after and he goes, I see your data, but I don't think it's right. I said, okay. I said, what do you think you saw? Well, I saw 20 bushel
Station.
applied. He goes, the ground applied doesn't matter. I said, okay, that's fine. I said,
Underneath,
what do you think the difference is? Well, you know what?
as in that part of
He's like, I had a custom guy
That is-
through and harvest it, and
the cow-calf operations, there's hay producers, and an improved Bermuda grass, coastal Bermuda grass, which has the capability of using up to 10 tons per acre per year,
well,
is there.
I'm like,
So they do put out a lot of,
well then, I'm not going to rain on your parade, but that's the mentality of saying, a side by side in the field, you could maybe tell something from if you really wanted to. A side by side miles away, now you're just grasping at straws. So here's some of the
One
projects
time.
we've worked on in the past 11 years.
Equinox.
A lot of them, like I said, are pretty basic. If we're at plant population, there's times that you can change it from the tractor. There's times that you actually get out and change the manual transmission. There's times that you can actually split the planter because there's transmissions on both sides. Seed treatments, we typically would just split the planter right down the middle. So rows 1 through 8
they
would be
really like.
and 9 through 16 would be untreated. Foliar fungicides, just a matter of putting a sprayer on and going. Tillage systems, knowing what size of harvest width they have. Planting date, those are trials where they were in no
Clear cut, but I'll show you what they found, all right?
RTK GPS is developed. We've had pretty good luck doing stuff like that. And row spacing trials, that's where we were looking at narrow row soybeans where we'd be using a 30-inch planter
5 months.
Well, we'd plant our 30-inch, and then we'd go and plant 15.
Parts per million where there was no gypsum.
So it's kind of a crude way of doing it, but it's cheaper than buying a 15-inch planter. And then guys that were curious about planting speed, how fast can I actually plant before I'm starting to see my yield drag off? And one of those guys was getting up to 8 miles an hour, and he says the best time he ever had planting. Plant population, we kind of some of the things we talked about. So
You can
we had a couple trials in corn. You kind of throw the variable. You've got 2 different corn heads, 2 different planters, but we
worth going.
the systems approach.
Okay.
Now, we were still trying to make the population the same. We just knew we had a 20-inch planter and a 30-inch planter, and presented that data as such.
kind of
So
not worth going any higher.
what went wrong, the planning throughout the season, the timeline, and then just some of the other tips. So what can go wrong? I make the assumption that, when a cooperator tells me, okay, I'm going
This has
to
happened.
this hybrid on this trial, and it's a huge corn. And then you would take that assumption for it, and you get all the way through the season, and you find out it was a stacked crate corn.
That by range, all of
A
that.
lot of your data out the window. So I learned pretty early, you want to make sure whatever hybrid or variety
More to
before season,
later.
season, the double,
Treatment.
before
What treatment effect?
into doing that trial itself. This one might be a little, but we had a handheld WASP receiver,
Come up.
so I knew where the fields were. That worked to get you to the field, but it would not get you right to the row. And that's a really big deal.
That should have filled in the stream.
If you
And
on the field,
this was a
where does it really start? Where does it really stop? And then what kind of quality of data do you have? In Iowa, we say keep it simple, stupid. I don't know if we say that out here or not, but it's pretty easy to be like, start compounding things, being like, hey, do a fungicide trial. You know what? Well, if we're just going to do fungicide, why don't we see if population makes a difference? Okay. Well, how about if on the back half, I put in 50 units of nitrogen? Tell you what, why don't we concentrate on 2? Let's get those down, and then we can build on it the next year. Because before you compound things, all of a sudden, you might be getting
quarter, 2.5.
data, and are you doing the right analysis? Are you getting the right answer? I've had a lot more success doing 3 variables on a pretty simple study than trying to compound things where we did a row spacing on trial with anhydrous, and then with hog manure, and then additional nitrogen, and then we want to throw a fungicide. It's like, that's too much, because we were going to forget where we're at in the field if we're not using
The whole
monitor, and even then, we want to make sure that we're sending good data. So, equipment settings, it kind of goes back to that custom operator. Custom operator wants to keep moving. They might just punch a number in the planner and away you go, and all of a sudden you might have strips of 125,000, 135,000, 175,000, and then 150,000, and then 135, and then 195. What do you have? Nothing. You have strips of multiple populations out there that don't tell you anything. So that's a big deal. Making sure your equipment settings are correct, and if you can be there with a cooperator to help in that manner, it's the foundation of making sure that it's going to be a successful year.
really.
And again, not
Fertilizer strip,
to me.
a sampling area, and then a grass
It comes down to communication.
sample.
I never assume anything. I always want to make sure that grower has my cell phone number, and that if I miss a call from them, I will call them right back. Because there's times where they don't want to be bothered and want to bother you, and if I didn't do a good job of letting them know how important this is to me, it's pretty easy for them just to combine right through it. Especially if they're sitting right in front of my orange steak, and all of a sudden they're in the combine and I didn't answer the phone, and they're like, screw it, I want to keep going. All of a sudden that whole year is out the window. And then 11 o'clock phone calls. Sometimes I had guys that were just not aware of what time it was. And I learned this my 3rd year. I remember that because my wife was pregnant with our first son, and she was having a hard time sleeping. And at 11 o'clock, my phone rang, and it was one of my farmers.
Really? No.
My phone on ring and not on vibrate. And so that one's for my wife. So just be aware. I wanted to make myself available to these guys because it was very important to me. And they took the time throughout the whole season to take time out of their schedule, and they could have just gone right through it. But for them to call me even at 11 o'clock, it was still important to me.
The lowest rate.
Who's going to? I'm always going to be the one going to be communicating. I'm going to be the one that I don't have to worry about them assuming, because I'm going to call them before the busy seasons, that they're aware of what's going on. And
About the
problems, the harvest inefficiencies. We had a hard time in Iowa getting our bean platforms to line up with our planter widths. We got guys that have a 40-foot
I
planter,
guess the answer is
35-foot platform,
some,
or 25-foot platform, and no matter how hard you
well, it depends.
work out,
And
you're going to have
both.
5-foot platform. I will promise you there will nothing make them more mad when they are harvesting a single 30-inch row going across a half mile.
Now, who had so kind of
I used to be a lot bigger. So,
sells
but the best part is if they buy one of the rows and it's on them,
it that
potential yield loss, and that's a very serious thing too.
even talk about
Believe in that bias that product X is going to increase my yield by
it is to all the cations in a cell
those force
multiplied by their valence and estimate of ionic strength.
potential of that.
If soils have
Or you're going to find out if that you're actually getting that 20%
saline,
payback.
right?
That's
And saline means they have a high enough ionic.
what you want, but if you're paying $3 for that 20%, it doesn't pan out. And so all of a sudden you're drawing holes in what they're doing tactfully,
About this
and they're
step,
not paying. So, and then we actually had a high boy sprayer
Anybody here in county?
to do some in-season foliar applications. And so, like, with a ground applicator going through tasseled corn, what happens on the end rows? You gotta run them down. And you want to make a guy have a sick stomach, with $3 corn or less than $3 corn to hear, but the best part of that is one, they understood that I was going to run down the end rows. The second part is when I made my first pass, I was turning around back, and he was at the end of that first round. I had jumped off the sprayer, and I counted how many corn plants I had driven over. I said, Steve, we drove down 125 corn plants. We can equate that to how much, but, I tell you what, if we see a yield boost from this, I won't expect anything in return. If we don't, I'll buy you supper, because we were going to get good yield data. And that was the premise of what I was out
So if you're looking at older publications,
for him before he could ask, made my life a lot easier. And then protocols. I've had guys from campus that would send me a whole packet. Okay, here's the protocol on how to do a soybean population study. And you hand that in front of a farmer and said, you want to read that? No, I want the meat and potatoes. And that's what you give them. And I'll go through that. Oh, we'll go back to that. But you get them the meat and potatoes. So location. I don't know how realistic it is in your area.
water, so I to solve out. It is at the basis of
In Iowa, you can find straight and rectangular uniform in certain areas. We can make about anything work. We've worked around terraces, we work around contours. The key is I've had a lot of growers that are very familiar with the field.
those of you
They
that
know where the good areas are, they know where the mediocre areas are. I want them to tell me where is the best place to put this plot, because if you're not confident in the results that we're going to get from this plot, don't waste your time. We want to make sure that we're getting good data
soil
you
and water and
believe in. Because if you don't believe in it, how do I sell it? And then you're going to be telling all your neighbors, yeah, put it in this part, but
Maryland, but I
it's
think
anything.
okay.
It went from bad to worse. So I try to visit about prior crop history, agronomic history. They put
Created by
one part of it not on.
or more sodium ions. All right?
Chance we can get next to a paved road, I put a sign up.
Sodium is when it tells you
Because they'd always have neighbors would ask, what's going on?
Magnesium.
What are you doing?
it doesn't give you sodium, you need
And they have their neighbors, I call it peer pressure, because now their neighbors want to know what's going on. And to some extent, I think,
kinds of
they wanted to know what the answer was to. they were proud to be able to do that plot
So
that they would have the answer of what worked on their farm. And then,
they're not saline yet.
ground squirrels,
The
raccoons,
reality is that in terms of managing that,
bulls get out one time and they mashed down a plot they were fighting in.
having a
Wished I would have got an aerial picture of that.
Yep.
But, try to stay away from the wet spots and
water and
equipment failure. So sometimes it can work. You just eliminate one of the replications. But boy, I had the best luck if I could get guys doing 4 replications. So when was the ideal time to communicate? Like I said, when we sit down at their kitchen table in late winter, well into early spring. I'm talking February, early March. They get ordered. They're starting to gear up for the spring. We can start talking about what trial do we want to do. What are we looking at? And saying, okay, if we're going to do soybeans, there's a good chance that if our harvest width doesn't match our planter width, there's going to be cleanup rows. How do you feel about having to take 6 rows back with your bean platform? I got to think about it. So that's fine. Maybe we can switch crops. Maybe we can't. We'll find out. I also found that at 7:15 in the morning,
so I know we're already seeing salinity.
that's when they're about
Oh.
the tractor, and they might be thinking about what's going on for the day, and I might be able to catch them in that moment of saying, hey, are we planting corn today? Are we harvesting? Is there anything that you need from me? And one of the things I learned, especially is like on September 20th, they call me and say, hey, we're sending up grain sample bags. Could you get us grain samples? I said, the plot of yours that we harvested yesterday, it isn't going to do a lot of good. And all of a sudden, because I was an employee of the Iowa State, so I was kind of required to do some of that stuff. These guys, they're going to laugh me out of the cap. There's no reason for it, especially if you knew how long ago you needed that information. As I said earlier, make yourself available. Try to have some patience. Cell phones have caller ID. There's nothing worse than being a telemarketer. And then one of the things I've run into, especially with one of my colleagues, is texting acceptable. And I think texting is a better form of communication. I think the better form of communication with texting is to win if you texted. And I usually say 2, maybe 3 texts. If anything over 3, you should be like, hey, just so we're clear, and stuff like that. So that's been my premise on texting. And like I said, with my disclaimer, you guys might have a different experience on that too.
But in this case,
regardless of what these guys, it's something that should be on your mind. And so we've got to work through that stuff. I've never lost a plot due to a weekend. The guys will call me and say, hey, are you working on Saturday? I said, what time do you want to start? And I will be there. And I've got guys that...
And most of what comes out of the soil.
I'm going to the football
game. And
could we do it Wednesday? He says,
okay, so...
It's one of those things, it's part of the job. If agriculture runs 7 days a week, 24 hours...
They're going to...
Farmers are yield-driven. When we published our book every year, we'd have guys that would start there and roll down all the results and be like, all right, I got the highest yield. That's great. But that's good, but we're looking for the treatment response. That's we want to see, did this product work? And then we can start going to the analysis and stuff like that. So there were times that we almost debated about taking out the yield and then just labeling the treatment response so that we would say product X saw a 4 bushel yield increase. And then we started to wonder if we ever do more analysis, do we start putting it in different yield ranges? Do different products work in different yield ranges? And we never got to that point, but it took the point home. We want to be cautious about if we're just got guys that are trying to drive the higher yield or if they actually want to look at the treatment response. Much like I said earlier, 12-row combine heads don't like harvesting 4 rows. And if you think it's long time watching a 12-row corn head going across the field harvesting 4 rows, wait till the farmer gets out of the combine. They can talk, yell for a very, very long time. And then everyone is busy. I've yet to meet anybody that's not busy. So, using busy. Well, I can't do it right now, but maybe we could do it next week. Those are the conversations you want to have ahead of time. I always ask my guys, if you could give me a day's notice, I would do my best to be there. I could be there. I might be able to make an hour work. It depends on how harvest was rolling in different areas, but more often than not, they would say, they'd give me 2 or 3 days, and all of a sudden, that morning, they'd call and say, hey, we're going to take that plot out, and it all worked out. So, like I said, keep in mind when it's the best time to communicate, and you'll get to know the grower and find that out. Put them right during planting just to say, hey, how's life going? And I guess the premise I've always tried to take too is that I'm a guest on your farm. You know, I'm going to try to leave it better than what I found. If they have an Iowa rock in their farm, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to throw it in my truck.
Yeah.
You know, try to leave that farm electric.
Okay, there's an envelope of charge.
So, and during late winter, like I said, we write on the protocol.
Okay.
It's very nuts and bolts. There's nothing fancy about it. And then we'd make a copy. And I didn't have a copy machine, but like, you guys ever seen carbon paper? We got this new copy thing out in Iowa. You take your 2 sheets and you put this piece of carbon paper in there and you get an exact duplicate. And then I put it in a plastic sleeve, and then I give that to the farmer. They get the original copy. And if I ever got those things back, they had been in the tractor, they had been bounced on by the seed, they were dusty as all get out, and they had markers all over them. They had written down what needed to be done and X'd out when they put that plot in, and then they filled in the critical information. So like, it got used, and that for me made my life so much easier.
Right, concentration.
I'd make a copy of that, and we'd set up those projects. Like I said, we do our best to base it off of the harvest width. That was the best way that I could find out to be efficient for these guys to get harvest done efficiently for them, but yet correctly for me. So, like I said, continue to communicate the loss of efficiency if it is potential, or the loss of yield. And then, if they're really not interested in doing a soybean project, it seems like more often than not, our corn head was half our planter width. Sometimes the same, but usually half. So we could put a corn project in very simply.
They'd like to stay put.
And then the technology that's available, split planters, whether they have transmissions on both sides or both fill tanks.
Van der Waals forces.
We just RTK for planting date studies. And then this was my protocol sheet. Very basic. You know, there's nothing fancy about it. But it had, for me, what I found was very important information that I could relate back to help publish. But then I could also double check throughout the season just to make sure that these guys were getting the right product or the right answer for me, for my data to be published then. So, you know, the planted crop, the hybrid of the variety, the previous crop, tillage, planted date, was there a seed treatment, what kind of insecticide, what rate, you know, did we split the planter? And you wouldn't believe like how many times guys would sit there and, did I split the planter? Okay, what side did I put on where? You know, so they'd sit there and we'd walk out to the field, things like that. And then right down here, that's where I just draw boxes.
If you're farther,
Say, okay, your first pass, you're going to have 12 rows of
and here's
A. And then on the way back, you're going to have 12 rows of treatment B. And then 12 rows of treatment A, 12 rows of treatment B, and then 12 rows of treatment B, and then 12 rows of treatment A. Because we
this is
replicated it and we just randomized it. All they knew, they had to go and say, okay, got to switch population to 36,000. Oh, got to switch it back to 32,000. Back to 36, 32, 32, 36. So the more I spelled it out, the more clean where they didn't have to sit there and thumb through a whole bunch of papers, made my life a lot easier and I think a little more successful too. So, early summer, about the June frame for us.
the
Thing was planted. It was right before they were starting their first post pass on corn. I could catch them for a window, and I'd have them take me out to the plot, and we'd talk about
calm, the cloud of,
seeing and how
and that's
really.
the way to think of
And so,
it.
my plot with my flags, I put an orange stake out there and 2 orange flags, so I knew where the edge of the plot was, and I would never move their flags. Sometimes they would have a seed bag with a rock on it. So, I'm trying to think of, that was probably the most memorable one. But I learned, don't ever touch their stuff. So they knew what that seed bag and rock meant, but I also knew what my flags and my stakes meant. And then I would record, did we still use the same hybrid, or
Crust is very low.
was the population in
For
this,
soil.
any treatments, or anything else that happened to this plot that I needed to know about? Did you plant it the same day? Yep. Well, simple questions like that can make your life a lot easier. And then the other thing too is I counted rows from the most permanent barrier, whether it was a fence row or the road. It's amazing how things shift throughout the growing season, but always knowing where that plot starts and stops. So marking plots, used a kind of a variety of different things. It was just reassurance for me going through the season, knowing where those plots were, not relying upon GPS. Sometimes, like even I'd have guys that would have a hired man or a guy that would want to come out and run the combine. And like if they saw something like that or like that, they would stop and ask the farmer, what's going on out there? Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you about that plot. Whereas, their hired help would have gone just right through it. So things like that have given me a lot more reassurance in knowing if that plot's out there and it's not the farmer combine, it's still going to be there when I want it to be there.
It worse. There's some physical.
Mark the edges of the
There was some
experiment,
last
which I did right there, kind of a
subject.
Excel like a thumb. That way, if they're going along, and I can't help it all the time, but for more often than not, if they're going to start harvesting beans, even on the other side, if they end up cutting that, they're going to know they need to stop and either call me or go around it. I also say edible. I want to use something that if it goes through the combine, I don't have to buy a combine. I had a guy, he was putting T-posts out there. I said, that's a really bad idea because I said a T-post and a corn head do not mix. And I'm not sure what inspired him to use a T-post. I don't think it was common sense. But, and then easy to see. They stick out. Blaze orange and red. Green kind of sticks out here too. But I kind of contradict myself when I say edible. I drug a foot 4-inch PVC out to this guy's cornfield. We were doing aerial applied fungicide. And had a hard time communicating with the pilot on where we wanted the strips. He knew where the field was. And so I ended up taking 4 sections of 4-inch, 10-foot long PVC pipe and spray painted them blaze orange and told the pilot just to center over each one of them. And so that way, well, even in the fall, you can tell, I don't even think Ray Charles could have missed that.
And remember, in Georgia, they're one state.
I'm still going to stop out and visit with the farmer. I'm going to check in and say, hey, I'm going to look at the plot. Do you want to come with?
Got the
questions? No, just let me know what you find.
We'll throw some money at you.
That's what I would do, and sometimes we'd have a treatment application, ask them if they want to ride along, break in everything,
Okay.
do that off the state.
Probably fun solutions. Maybe not the solutions.
They could scout from the sky in the field.
The problem. Give us some.
Early fall, I'm going to go out there and do stand counts, check the plots, make sure all of my things are checking out. Are my stakes where they need to be? Can you still see them? Are they away from the end rows? I had one that had flags too close to the end rows. They brought through the chopper, thought they were doing me a huge favor. And I had 2 wires and a half mile that I was able to find my plot back in. I thought I'd been a lot thinner by walking that much, but I learned, move it a good 4 or 5 feet into the plot, then you know where those edges are. And then I try to explain harvest plans. Otherwise, I got a harvest sheet. Some guys don't need me there. They just want to keep rolling right through the field. If I can give them a USB drive, they'll pop it on there and say, hey, I left it in the shop when you need it. That's a pretty slick deal for me. So the more you can spell out the plot, so they have a lot more things on their mind than what I had on mine, that if they're willing to put that stuff
And their season.
put that stuff into a harvest sheet so they can read and say, okay, yep, this is exactly where I need to be because this is what the harvest sheet says and this is what lines up. So again, at harvest, we want to make sure I count the rows so I know.
And this is by storm.
And then I try to ride the first pass. Just again, explain to them.
Plots. They had collected
There could be
at
inefficient.
the bottom of every plot. They had every.
Just so they are aware how this project's going to go. And usually, it would take about an hour and a half to do 4 reps. And there are different ways that we harvested, but You know, and then there's always the egg on your face if your weigh wagon runs out of gas.
Less runoff.
You want to make sure you have the correct plot map.
Runoff with tips in it.
The briefcase and USB drive. And I'm talking
Now, what does that mean?
about you, but there's what I'm talking about, the harvest sheet. You know,
You know, you're filling it up with steer. That's good.
And-
You don't want it running off. Right? You want it getting into.
treated in the way it goes through there. And then sometimes it asks for visuals. You know, where the untreated, could you see any more noticeable stock rot, stuff like that. And then I always left my cell phone too, and then a backup. If I don't answer my phone, he knows what's going on or he knows where I'm at.
This is pretty close to pounds per.
Did my best. It still takes time to harvest efficiently, but it's just part of doing on-farm trials.
Also, we've got
Calibrated yield monitor, like I said, we offer that service. If guys wanted to calibrate their yield monitor, we'd bring our weigh wagon out or a grain cart. Sometimes guys had grain carts with scales. Again, we were looking for the yield response. We weren't typically looking for the highest yield, and that was kind of a barrier to break down with some guys. So, and then I called a tag where if guys were okay with it, I would follow the combine back and forth to each edge of the field, each end of the field, and then they would dump onto the weigh wagon,
look at this totality. I think it's
record the weight, and then I'd follow them back, and they'd dump on that side, and then I'd empty into the wagon, and just keep going back and forth instead of them making a half round
going.
and then driving back full or driving back empty. They really like that. It just usually works out okay unless it's a really dry fall. We didn't burn up any cornfields, but there was also concern and stuff like that too. So anytime that you can move it a little faster, that puts a little more smile on their face too. So. And then during the winter, we
that have been
published the data. We had an extension agent that was also a statistician, so we'd run the numbers through them. They'd spit out what we
the impact of the.
and then get these guys together, feed them supper, and go through all the results. I think for $300, we were able to feed 21 people a pretty good meal, and then start triggering ideas for the next year. How am I doing on time, Jason? Am I doing okay on time? I have a lot.
Being rotated.
Okay, good. Okay. All right. So if I haven't bored you enough, I'll try to keep going. But remember to mark the long-term studies in the fall. We did some gypsum sulfur trials. I used tile flags that they stuck out pretty well so we could tell where those plots were at moving into the fall, or excuse me, into the next spring. And then anytime that you can get more of the same study, there's more power to that. Our first year was a conglomeration of single projects. It didn't tell you a whole lot of stuff other than this is what happened in that location. And guys realized that because, boy, it's really interesting. You tried soybean fungicide. I've heard a lot of things about that. Maybe I should try that on my farm. And all of a sudden you guys got networking that are trying this on there, and all of a sudden you've got 5, 6, 7 locations in Northwest Iowa that are able to start drawing a stronger reference from or inference from. And then which travels faster, bad news or good news? That's a big deal. I mean, if you guys are in ag, you understand how that is. That's a really big deal, and that's something I put on my shoulders is if I'm not doing a good job, I don't want people saying, oh, that lazy Josh Sievers, all he is a glorified tractor driver. I want to make sure that it wasn't something that I could have done better. So, and then seriously, like, do you guys have cooperators that are colorblind?
What about
And, one that was red-green colorblind. I had painted stakes we had a V6 application, a V6 plus R1, an R1, and a control. And the control and the V6, one was red and one was...
we have a farm. Basically, they...
like, well, there should actually be 4 stakes. But he's like, no, in this pattern. And I'm like, we got finally figured out. He's like, well, I'm red-green colorblind. So one of the conversations I never thought I'd have in my job, but that helps somebody else in there is more power to it. So what
to be sure.
I always carry a basic set of hand tools. Any breakdown that they have, boy, if you can give them a 17 millimeter wrench when they don't have one, that buys a lot of PR. A lot of patience is a big deal because sometimes things just don't go the way it does, and if you're worked up, they're worked up, and then nothing ends up very well. An assistant, I'm not talking, this guy's dog actually jumped in the back of my pickup, so But if you got knows what's going on, which is great, but
Well-
three can be a crowd. 5 minutes, okay.
And then
Can be a crowd. If you got person A and person B, that's enough, because otherwise they don't know who they need to communicate. Well, I told them, but I told them, and I told them. And then the Ziploc bags, sometimes they have guys that say your moisture meter's way off. Do you care if I take a grain sample, take it in town, and I'll get it corrected, or I'll make sure that I'm accurate, so we're getting the right answer. A little redundant.
Okay.
If it made them happy, it made me happy. And then one of the things I guess I kind of glazed over was a briefcase. I always kept a cooler with pop and Little Debbie's.
it says,
I know that sounds really stupid, but like guys never have time to talk, but they always have time for a pop and a Little Debbie. In a 5-minute window like that, I kid you not, I got a hard time in Iowa for that stuff. But you know, I had about, out of all the, I think I did over 580 on-farm trials. I had like a 95% success rate. I could buy windows with that stupid stuff, and it cost me $1 to get that stuff. So I never left home. I actually had people that would revolve their life around, well, Josh will be here at 3. We'll wait to have lunch until then. So, and that's all right. I'm plenty okay with that. Who's actually getting the better end of the deal? I'm getting the data, and they're getting a lousy can of Pepsi. So build that bridge. It's a relationship business. It's no different than what you guys are doing right now. Promote it. Put in the field signs, websites, social media, stuff like that. Kind of a peer pressure thing, like I had said earlier. Never assume. That's a big deal. You know, it's easy to, but we know what happens when things like that transpire.
okay,
Keep it simple. Don't overwhelm yourself with your cooperator, because then all of a sudden you're going to lose a project. Communication, timing, produce the data. That's what we're in it for. And then the keys to success, I'm just going to glaze right down to the bottom, was commitment to communicate, keep people in the loop of what's going on, and stuff like that. So, and this is kind of, I saw it on the internet one time, was please be safe, do not stand, sit, or climb on, lean on fences. If you fall, the animals could eat you, and that might make them sick. So, but like I said, tractor driver extraordinaire. If you guys have any questions or email or whatever, but I hope you learned something. Like I said, that's my experience.